from half full or lower warehouses in Europe, and therefore the bottom of the barrel is now visible.
But the weapons do not include the one item that Ukraine calls its priority: Western tanks.
We do have equipment, but we need more. And we need more and more and more, because they won't stop until we stop them.
The main message coming out of the Ukraine Defense Contact Group, which was this meeting of more...
Current rate of Ukraine's ammunition expenditure is many times higher.
If employed properly, it will enable them to be successful.
Ammunition shortages and production surge. The US and Europe are struggling to supply Ukraine with the necessary ammunition for a prolonged counteroffensive against Russia, prompting Western officials to increase production to avoid shortages on the battlefield. The dwindling supply of artillery ammunition has prompted NATO to consider a protracted land war in Europe. The US has been nearing the red line in supplying Ukraine with 155mm ammunition, the NATO standard used for artillery rounds. Germany has taken steps to close existing ammunition gaps and increase reserves, with munitions for the Swiss-made Gepard tank being produced in Germany. The Defense Department has set a goal of producing 70,000 artillery shells per month, but Ukraine is still burning through the available supply
from half full or lower warehouses in Europe, and therefore the bottom of the barrel is now visible.
Since the start of Russia's full-scale invasion, the U.S. and its allies have supplied Ukraine with tens of billions of dollars, but the weapons do not include the one item that Ukraine calls its priority: Western tanks.
With Ukrainian troops firing between 2,000 and 3,000 artillery shells per day at Russian forces. This puts a strain on the international supply of munitions, as the U.S. has been training Ukrainian forces on combined arms maneuvers for months. Russia extensively mined the land Ukraine is trying to recapture, slowing down the counteroffensive and forcing the Ukrainians to use artillery to destroy targets from further away. U.S. officials became concerned about the U.S.'s ability to resupply Ukraine, leading President Joe Biden to send Kiev highly controversial cluster munitions. However, President Biden ordered the Pentagon to work rapidly to scale up the United States' ability to produce all the ammunition they could ever need for any conflict at any time. The Army's production ramp-up of 155mm artillery ammunition continues as planned, with contracts in place to rapidly increase production over the next year and a half. NATO faces challenges in incentivizing contractors to increase production of supplies, particularly 155mm artillery shells, which governments haven't been purchasing en masse in recent years.
We do have equipment, but we need more. And we need more and more and more, because they won't stop until we stop them.
And we need the industry to ramp up production in a much higher tempo.
To send its own M1 Abrams tanks. U.S. officials say its jet engine and jet fuel make it unsustainable.
Financial commitments from the U.S. and Europe have helped ease some of these concerns. The EU has reached a deal to spend 500 million euros to subsidize European arms manufacturers, allowing for changes to existing framework agreements around ammunition production. At the NATO summit in Vilnius, the French and Ukrainian defense ministers signed an agreement establishing a framework for joint production of spare parts and maintenance of foreign weapons and equipment. The Pentagon has asked Congress to provide enough funding to allow the Defense Department to strike multi-year contracts with defense contractors. NATO is realizing the importance of not allowing crucial supply chains to fall dormant and isn't taking for granted the idea that another country will step in to fill the gap. NATO's senior military official warns. NATO's most senior military official has warned that European ammunition stocks are running short as the West continues to send large amounts of military aid to Ukraine to fend off invading Russian forces. Admiral Rob Bauer, who chairs the NATO Military Committee, said Europe needed to ramp up production as the war enters its 20th month. We now give away weapon systems to Ukraine, which is great, and ammunition, but not from full warehouses.
Quote, condescending, and the Ukrainians can figure out how to keep the M1 Abrams going. Why do you think they can't? Are trying to figure out how to get all these armored vehicles and their parts into Ukraine.
The main message coming out of the Ukraine Defense Contact Group, which was this meeting of more.
We started to give away from half-full or lower warehouses in Europe, and therefore the bottom of the barrel is now visible, and we need the industry to ramp up production at a much higher tempo. We need large volumes Bauer told delegates Wednesday at the Warsaw Security Forum, adding that political leaders needed to act faster. We need the continued support from the political level because it's not only the money, it's also the actions of the nations that lead to more readier forces and the capabilities we need, Bauer said. And if you actually see that in the 7 years before the war, the defense budgets went up already, but the industry didn't increase the production capacity, and that has led to higher prices already before the war. Forces fire thousands daily. Ukrainian forces are firing several thousand artillery shells every day at invading Russian forces, with much of the ammunition supplied by Kiev's Western allies. NATO member states have also given Kiev tanks, armored vehicles, missile and air defense systems, and an array of other military hardware. The European Union, Britain, and the United States have outlined plans to ramp up weapons production. The EU earlier this year allocated $2.2 billion for the joint procurement and delivery of up to an additional 1 million rounds of artillery ammunition to Ukraine by early 2024 and an additional $550 million to urgently boost EU defense industry capacities in ammunition production. Simultaneously replenishing stockpiles and supplying Ukraine will require clearer signals from Western political leaders, said analyst Simona Soare of Britain's Lancaster University, a former EU defense advisor. Efforts from a budgetary point of view, from a procurement point of view, that allies have made individually and jointly.
We announced a package in the last 24 hours of $2.5 billion.
Current rate of Ukraine's ammunition expenditure is many times higher.
And I can thank you hundreds of times, and it will be absolutely just and fair.
Are still not on par with the level of the demand, Soare told VOA. It all starts with that absolutely clear demand signal that comes from our political and military leadership towards our industry to engage in this effort jointly. And I believe that there's a lot more that can be done from that level to communicate that this effort isn't a temporary surge, but rather it's a sustained, potentially longer-term effort. Pentagon warns U.S. leaders. In a letter to congressional leaders, the Pentagon warned it's running low on money to replace weapons the U.S. has sent to Ukraine. According to the Associated Press, Pentagon Comptroller Michael McCord told House and Senate leaders there's $1.6 billion left of the $25.9 billion Congress provided to replenish U.S. military stocks that have been flowing to Kiev and urged them to replenish funding. The United States has given an estimated $46.6 billion in military aid to Kiev since Russia's February 2022 invasion. The U.S. Congress passed a last-minute stopgap funding bill September 30th to avert a government shutdown, but it didn't include any new aid for Ukraine. President Joe Biden has vowed to continue American support for Kiev.
How do you know that they'll have enough of those munitions, those parts, those modern weapons?
It calls to send its own tanks or allow other countries to re-export their Leopard tanks to Ukraine.
And finally, how do you prioritize orders, especially moving forward? You've argued that the weapons going to Ukraine do not affect.
Meanwhile, the EU has given almost $27 billion and Britain an estimated $7 billion in military aid, according to the Kiel Institute for the World Economy. Boosting weapons production takes time, Soare said. It takes on average between 2 and 4 years to set up a new production line for high-intensity military equipment that you need in Ukraine, Soare told VOA. Same thing goes for munitions. We're talking about hundreds, potentially thousands of people who need to have very, very niche skill sets to be employed in this undertaking. Soare added that Europe must diversify its supply chains for the crucial raw materials needed to produce modern weapons. There are significant and long-standing dependencies on single providers for some of these absolutely critical rare earths, for instance, which now go at astronomical prices, she said. And that impacts on the affordability side of the war effort. Significant implications of ceasing commercial ammunition sales at Lake City Ammunition Plant. Something significant occurred yesterday in direct response to the events in Israel. It concerns the Lake City Ammunition Plant located in Missouri, which is owned by the United States government. Currently, Winchester holds the contract to operate it, and this plant plays a crucial role in producing the 5.56mm ammunition used by the military, as well as producing some for commercial availability. With the ongoing developments overseas and the United States exporting weapons and ammunition, the first noteworthy consequence:
Ukraine will soon receive an unprecedented amount of new weapon systems
designed to provide Ukraine with the fundamental building blocks for how modern armies fight.
Was the arrival of a shipment 2 days ago. This was somewhat anticipated, but the United States government, which oversees the Lake City ammunition plant, made an announcement. They declared the cessation of all commercial ammunition sales, which includes contracts with commercial businesses. Essentially, this means that all commercial ammunition orders were canceled. Now, all the ammunition produced at the Lake City ammunition plant will be directed towards military endeavors, whether it's for domestic use or international operations. The implications of this decision are uncertain, and we'll need to closely monitor the situation. It's worth noting that this isn't the first step in redirecting resources. The United States has been sending ammunition to Ukraine amid the ongoing conflict. The key question is what this means for consumers in the United States. Will it lead to a situation reminiscent of the recent ammunition shortages? It's too early to tell, but the decision to cease commercial operations at the Lake City plant could certainly affect ammunition availability. As for the extent of the impact,
if employed properly, it will enable them to be successful.
That the Abrams is too difficult to maintain because of its jet engine.
It's unclear how much of the market share was supplied by this plant, but it's apparent that the supply and demand dynamics will likely be influenced by this change. If you've been considering purchasing ammunition, this might be a good time to do so, as it's uncertain when commercial operations will resume and orders have no defined timeline for fulfillment. In conclusion, this development may have consequences for ammunition availability and pricing, but the exact magnitude of the effect remains to be seen. It's also important to stay vigilant and informed, especially in light of recent events, including an attack on London. Always be cautious and prepared for unforeseen circumstances. That's all for this video, guys. See you next time, and bye for now.